For months, a combat veteran suffered from mysterious rashes that appeared every morning, leaving his skin inflamed and burning with unbearable pain. He believed it was simply an allergic reaction to bed bugs, but when the military doctor finally examined him under specialized equipment, the horrifying discovery left medical professionals screaming and immediately quarantining the entire facility. James Mercer had always prided himself on his resilience. During his 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine Corps scout sniper, he'd endured the harshest conditions imaginable without complaint. The blistering desert heat, the freezing mountain nights, the weeks without proper showers, none of it had broken him. His fellow Marines had nicknamed him Iron Skin for his ability to withstand extreme environments without developing the rashes and infections that plagued others in his unit. But now, 2 years after his honorable discharge, something was attacking his body that even his legendary endurance couldn't overcome. It started innocuously enough. A small patch of reddened skin on his left forearm that he noticed one morning. After a restless night's sleep, James dismissed it as a spider bite or perhaps a reaction to the new laundry detergent he'd been using. He applied some over-the-counter hydrocortisone cream and went about his day, teaching history at the local high school in the small mountain town of Pinecrest, Colorado, where he'd settled after leaving the service. The following morning, the rash had spread slightly, now covering an area roughly the size of a $50 coin. It felt warm to the touch and itched incessantly. James doubled down on the hydrocortisone treatment, adding an oral antihistamine to his regimen. Probably poison ivy, he told himself, though he couldn't recall encountering the plant during his recent hikes in the nearby national forest. By the end of the week, James knew he was dealing with something more serious. The rash had expanded to cover most of his forearm, and new patches had appeared on his torso and right thigh. The affected areas no longer just itched, they burned. A deep, penetrating pain that felt like his skin was being slowly cooked from the inside. Sleep became almost impossible as the sensations intensified at night, leaving him exhausted and irritable during his classes. "You look terrible, Mr. Mercer," one of his more outspoken students commented during third period. "Are you sick? Or something?" James forced a smile, not wanting to burden his students with his problems. Just a minor skin condition, nothing to worry about. But that evening, as he examined the spreading rash in his bathroom mirror, James admitted to himself that this was becoming something to worry about indeed. The original patch on his forearm had darkened to an angry purplish red with tiny raised welts forming a strange, almost geometric pattern across his skin. The new patches on his torso showed the same progression, and when he pressed them gently, the pain was electric, shooting through his nerve endings like fire. That night, he stripped his bed completely, washing all his bedding in hot water with a double dose of detergent. He vacuumed his mattress thoroughly and inspected it with a flashlight, looking for any signs of bed bugs, the dark specks of their droppings, the translucent husks of their shed skins, or the insects themselves hiding in the seams and corners. James found nothing conclusive, but he remained convinced that some kind of pest infestation must be causing his suffering. It was the only explanation that made sense. His small cabin was old, built in the 1950s, and despite his best efforts to maintain it, there were plenty of cracks and crevices where unwanted creatures could make their homes. The next day was Saturday, which gave James the opportunity to launch a full-scale assault on the potential infestation. He bought every bedbug product the local hardware store carried: special sprays, powder treatments for the carpet, sealed, covers for his mattress and pillows, and even small traps that could be placed under the legs of his bed frame to catch any bugs trying to climb up. He spent the entire day cleaning and treating his home, working methodically from one room to the next, the way his military training had taught him to clear a building. By evening, his cabin smelled strongly of chemicals, and his skin was irritated even further from the harsh cleaning agents. But James felt a grim satisfaction. Whatever was attacking him during the night would soon be eradicated. That satisfaction was short-lived. Sunday morning, he woke to find 3 new patches of the mysterious rash, these appearing on his neck and face. Worse, the existing patches had evolved in a disturbing way. The geometric patterns had become more pronounced, with the welts forming distinct shapes that almost resembled characters from an unfamiliar alphabet. When James took a photograph with his phone to get a better look, a chill ran down his spine. The patterns weren't random at all. They were organized, structured, almost as if something was deliberately marking his skin. "This isn't possible," he whispered to his empty cabin. Bedbugs didn't create patterns when they bit. They fed opportunistically, leaving random clusters of welts wherever they found exposed skin, and they certainly couldn't create what looked like deliberate designs. For the first time since the problem began, James felt a flutter of genuine fear. His mind flashed back to Afghanistan, to the strange illnesses that occasionally swept through remote villages, diseases that the military doctors sometimes struggled to identify, that didn't appear in any of their medical textbooks. Had he brought something back with him, some exotic parasite that had lain dormant in his system until now? He reached for his phone and called the VA hospital in Denver, the nearest major city. After navigating through the automated system and explaining his situation to 2 different administrators, he finally secured an appointment for the following week. "I need to see someone sooner," James insisted, his voice tight with pain and urgency. "This is spreading rapidly." "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer," the scheduling administrator replied, her tone sympathetic but firm. "Next Tuesday is the earliest we can get you in with a dermatologist. If you feel this is an emergency, you should go to the urgent care center." James considered this option, but ultimately decided against it. His experience with civilian urgent care had been disappointing. Long waits to see overworked providers who rarely had the specialized knowledge to deal with unusual conditions. Better to endure for another week and see a proper VA doctor who might have experience with conditions veterans brought back from overseas deployments. That decision would prove to be a critical mistake. Over the next 3 days, the rash accelerated its invasion of James's body. New patches appeared every morning, each displaying the same unsettling geometric patterns, each burning with a pain that ordinary analgesics barely touched. The original patches began to change texture, becoming slightly raised from the surrounding skin, with a waxy appearance that reminded James unnervingly of scar tissue, though he couldn't recall being injured in those precise locations. Sleep became nearly impossible. Even the lightest fabric against his skin felt like sandpaper dragging across open wounds. James took to sleeping in his bathtub, the cool porcelain providing minor relief, though he had to position himself carefully to avoid pressure on the worst affected areas. During his waking hours, he existed in a fog of pain and exhaustion, moving through his teaching duties like a ghost, his students watching him with increasing concern. On Thursday, the principal called him into her office. "James, we need to talk about what's going on," Sarah Kendrick said, her face creased with worry. "Parents are calling. They're concerned you might be contagious, that you could be exposing their children to something." "It's not contagious," James replied automatically, though he had no way of knowing if this was true. "I'm seeing a specialist next week. It's probably just an allergic reaction or maybe some kind of eczema." Sarah's expression made it clear she wasn't convinced. "I think you should take some sick leave, James, just until you get a definitive diagnosis, for your own health and to reassure the community." He wanted to argue, to insist that he could continue working, but the truth was that he was barely functioning. The constant pain and sleep deprivation were affecting his ability to teach effectively. And if there was even the slightest chance that whatever was happening to him could affect others, he couldn't take that risk. "You're right," he conceded. "I'll take the sick leave." That afternoon, alone in his cabin with nothing to distract him from his condition, James decided to document the progression of the rash. Using his phone's camera, he took detailed photographs of each affected area, noting the time and date. If nothing else, these images would help the doctors understand what he was experiencing. As he reviewed the photos, zooming in on the strange patterns that marked his skin, something caught his attention. In the images of the original patch on his forearm, the one that had appeared first, he could now see that the geometric shapes had a certain repetition to them, a sequence that occurred multiple times across the affected area. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't immediately place what. James grabbed his laptop and began searching online for information about unusual rashes, parasitic infections, and tropical diseases that military personnel might encounter. Most of the results were standard medical websites describing common conditions like scabies, ringworm, and various forms of dermatitis. Nothing that matched what was happening to him. Growing increasingly desperate, he expanded his search to include less reputable sources, forums where veterans shared stories about unusual medical conditions, conspiracy theory sites that speculated about biological weapons, and experimental military programs. Normally, James would have dismissed such sources immediately, but his situation had pushed him beyond conventional thinking. On one obscure forum dedicated to classified medical incidents in combat zones, he found a thread that made his blood run cold. A former army medic described treating a special forces operator who had returned from a classified mission in a remote region of Afghanistan with an unusual skin condition, a rash that formed distinct patterns and caused intense burning pain. The medic included no photographs, but his description matched James's symptoms with disturbing accuracy. The thread had been abandoned years ago, with no follow-up information about what had caused the condition or how it had been treated. But one detail stood out. The medic mentioned that the rash seemed to intensify at night and spread most rapidly while the patient was sleeping, just as James's did. With shaking hands, James set up his phone to record time-lapse video of himself. While he slept, he positioned it carefully on his dresser, angled to capture his upper body, where many of the rash patches were concentrated. Then, despite the pain, he forced himself to lie down on his bed, determined to capture whatever was happening to him during the night. Morning brought a new level of horror. Not only had the rash spread further, now covering nearly 40% of his body, but when James reviewed the time-lapse video, he saw something that defied rational explanation. Around 3 a.m., the existing patches on his skin began to emit a faint pulsating glow, a sickly greenish light that ebbed and flowed in a coordinated rhythm. As he watched, the patterns on his skin shifted slightly, the geometric shapes rearranging themselves into new configurations while he slept unaware. James stared at the screen in disbelief, playing the sequence again and again. This wasn't a bedbug infestation. It wasn't any kind of ordinary skin condition. It was something else entirely, something beyond his comprehension. And suddenly, waiting until next Tuesday for his VA appointment seemed impossible. With trembling fingers, he dialed the emergency contact number for a former Marine Corps doctor he'd known during his service, a man who had later joined a specialized medical research unit within the Department of Defense. If anyone might have encountered something like this before, it would be Dr. Alexander Weiss. The phone rang 4 times before Dr. Weiss answered, his voice thick with sleep. Weiss speaking. This better be important. It's James Mercer, sir. I served under your medical supervision in Kandahar, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. There was a pause, then recognition. Mercer, the sniper with the Iron Constitution. Been a while. "I need your help, Doc. I'm dealing with something unusual." James struggled to keep his voice steady. "A skin condition that's spreading rapidly. It forms patterns, and I just recorded it, glowing and moving while I sleep." The silence on the other end stretched for so long that James thought the call had dropped. Finally, Dr. Weiss spoke, his tone now sharp and alert. "Send me the video and photos immediately. Use my secure email. Don't share this with anyone else, understand? And whatever you do, don't scratch or disturb the affected areas." James felt a wave of relief mixed with dread. The doctor's reaction confirmed that this wasn't just in his head, but it also suggested something far more serious than he'd imagined. "I need to see someone now, not next week. My VA appointment is too far out." "Forget the VA," Dr. Weiss said firmly. "I'll make some calls. There's a private research facility in Colorado Springs, the Harrington Institute. They have specialized equipment and containment protocols. I'll arrange for you to be seen today. Can you drive yourself, or do you need transportation?" The question caught James off guard. Containment protocols? Why would he need to be contained? "I can drive," he answered automatically, military training kicking in. "Respond first, process later." "Good. Head there immediately. Don't stop anywhere. Don't interact with anyone if you can avoid it. Pack as if you might be staying for a few days." Dr. Weiss paused. "And Mercer? This line isn't secure, so I can't say more, but I need to know. Did your unit ever enter the Shahikot caves during your deployment?" The question sent a chill through James. His unit had indeed been part of a classified operation exploring a network of caves in the Shahikot Valley, caves that locals had avoided for generations, claiming they were cursed. The mission had been officially designated as a search for Taliban weapon caches, but James had always suspected there was another objective. They'd been accompanied by civilian specialists in hazmat suits who collected samples and took readings with equipment he didn't recognize. "Yes," he answered simply. "I thought so," Dr. Weiss replied, his voice now grim. "I'll meet you at the institute. Drive safely but quickly." The call ended, leaving James standing in his living room, phone clutched in his hand, mind racing with implications. He emailed the photos and video to Dr. Weiss, then packed a small duffel bag with essentials. As an afterthought, he added his military service records and medical history. Whatever was happening to him, it seemed increasingly likely that it was connected to his deployment. The drive to Colorado Springs normally took about 3 hours from Pinecrest, winding through mountain passes and then down to the Front Range. James made it in just over 2, pushing his aging Jeep to its limits, stopping only once to refuel. He kept his interaction with the gas station attendant minimal, paying at the pump and keeping his most visible rashes covered with long sleeves. Despite the warm day, the Harrington Institute wasn't what he expected. Rather than a large hospital complex, it was a cluster of low, nondescript buildings surrounded by high fencing, topped with barbed wire, tucked away on the outskirts of the city. The security checkpoint at the entrance was staffed by personnel who, despite their civilian clothes, moved with the disciplined precision that James recognized immediately as military. "I'm James Mercer," he told the guard at the gate. "Dr. Weiss should have called ahead." The guard checked something on his tablet, then nodded curtly. "You're expected, sir. Please proceed to Building C and park in the designated area. Someone will meet you." As James drove through the gate, he noticed security cameras tracking his movement and what appeared to be discrete decontamination stations positioned along the access road. This wasn't just a research facility, it was set up for biohazard containment. His apprehension deepened. He parked in the marked space outside Building C, a windowless structure with airlock-style double doors at its entrance. Before he could even exit his vehicle, a team of 4 people emerged from the building, dressed in what appeared to be modified medical scrubs with unusual protective elements. Not full hazmat suits, but clearly designed to provide some level of biological isolation. A woman with short grey hair and sharp, intelligent eyes approached his window. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Dr. Eleanor Raymond, Chief Medical Researcher here at Harrington. Dr. Weiss contacted us about your case. He's on his way, but we'd like to get you inside and begin preliminary examinations immediately." James nodded, gathering his duffel bag and stepping out of the Jeep. The team maintained a careful distance, observing him with clinical interest that did nothing to ease his growing sense of unease. "This way, please," Dr. Raymond said, leading him toward the entrance. "We'll need you to undergo a decontamination process before entering the main facility. Standard protocol. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about." The phrase rang hollow as James followed her through the first set of doors into what was clearly an advanced decontamination chamber. The space was clinically white, with recessed lighting and nozzles positioned at various heights along the walls. "You'll need to leave your belongings here, including all clothing," Dr. Raymond explained, indicating a series of sealed containers. "They'll be thoroughly examined and returned to you later. Through that door, you'll find sterile scrubs to change into after the decontamination process is complete." James hesitated only briefly before complying. His military experience had stripped him of any excessive modesty, and the clinical detachment of the medical team made the process less uncomfortable than it might have been. Still, as he placed his clothes in the designated container, he felt a vulnerability that went beyond simple nakedness. He was surrendering control, becoming a subject, rather than a person. The decontamination process was thorough and uncomfortable, a series of fine mists that covered his entire body, including the affected areas, causing the rash to burn with renewed intensity. James gritted his teeth against the pain, forcing himself to remain still as the automated system completed its work. Finally, a gentle current of warm air dried his skin, and he was able to step through to the next chamber where the promised scrubs awaited. Dressed in the thin blue garments, James was escorted deeper into the facility, through corridors that required keycard access at multiple points. They eventually arrived at what appeared to be a specialized examination room, equipped with medical technology far more advanced than anything he'd seen in standard hospitals or even VA facilities. "Please lie down on the examination table," Dr. Raymond instructed, gesturing to a padded surface in the center of the room. "We're going to conduct a series of non-invasive scans first to get a better understanding of what we're dealing with." James complied, lying flat on his back as technicians positioned equipment around him. The worst of the rash patches burned against the surface of the table, but he maintained his composure, focusing on his breathing the way he'd been trained to do during sniper operations. Slow, controlled inhalations and exhalations that helped manage pain and steady his heartbeat. "We've received the images and video you sent to Dr. Weiss," Dr. Raymond said as she calibrated one of the machines. "They're remarkable. I've been in specialized medical research for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it. The bioluminescent properties are particularly unusual." "Do you have any idea what it is?" James asked, trying to read her expression. "Is it some kind of parasite?" Dr. Raymond's face remained professionally neutral. "We're going to find out. The scanner will take about 15 minutes to complete its work. Try to remain as still as possible." The machine hummed to life, bathing James in a blue light that slowly moved from his head to his feet, back and forth in a precise pattern. He could feel a slight tingling sensation wherever the light passed over an affected area of skin, not painful, but distinctly unusual. "The patterns," he said, breaking the silence. They remind me of something, but I can't place it. They're too organized to be random irritation. Dr. Raymond studied a monitor displaying real-time results from the scan, her brow furrowed in concentration. You're right about that. The distribution and configuration suggest deliberate organization at a cellular level. She glanced at him, then back at the screen. Mr. Mercer, did anything unusual happen during your deployment to the Shah-e-Kot region? Any exposure to unknown substances or unidentified biological materials? James considered the question carefully. There had been one incident, never included in official reports. During their exploration of the cave system, his unit had discovered a chamber containing unusual crystalline formations that seemed to emit a faint glow in the darkness. The civilian specialists had been collecting samples when an unexpected tremor shook the cave. Several crystals had shattered, releasing a fine dust that briefly filled the air before the ventilation equipment could clear it. Everyone exposed had been immediately quarantined and tested, but after 72 hours with no symptoms, they'd been cleared to return to duty. The incident had been classified, with all personnel involved required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements. James had almost forgotten about it until Dr. Raymond's question brought it rushing back. There was something, he admitted, deciding that his current situation overrode any confidentiality concerns. Crystalline formations in one of the caves. They broke, released some kind of dust. We were all checked out afterward, cleared as unaffected. Dr. Raymond's expression changed subtly, a flash of recognition quickly masked by professional composure. I see. That's very helpful information. She made a note on her tablet, then continued monitoring the scan. The door to the examination room slid open, and Dr. Weiss entered, looking older than James remembered, but with the same intense focus in his eyes. He nodded briefly to James, then joined Dr. Raymond at the monitoring station, speaking in low tones that James couldn't quite make out. As they conferred, the scan completed its cycle and the blue light faded. The machine retracted, allowing Dr. Weiss to approach the examination table. Mercer, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Good to see you, though I wish it were. Under different circumstances. How's the pain level? Manageable, James replied automatically, the standard response of a soldier to a medical officer. Dr. Weiss's eyebrow raised slightly. This isn't a battlefield assessment, son. I need accurate information on a scale of 1 to 10. James hesitated, then admitted 7, maybe 8 when it pulses. Worse at night. That tracks with what we're seeing. Dr. Weiss nodded, then turned to one of the technicians. Prepare a localized scan of the primary site on his forearm, maximum resolution, and get the spectrographic analysis running. The technician moved to comply as Dr. Weiss turned back to James. Based on the preliminary scans and what you've shared, we have a working theory. I need to examine the affected areas more closely now, particularly the original site of infection. He donned specialized gloves that seemed to have sensors built into the fingertips, then carefully approached James's left forearm, where the first patch had appeared. His touch was gentle but clinical as he examined the raised, patterned skin. The crystalline structures you encountered in Afghanistan, Dr. Weiss said quietly, were part of a classified research interest. Very few people know about them, even within military scientific circles. They're not native to Earth, Mercer. James stared at him, processing the implications of that statement. You're saying they're extraterrestrial? That's the current theory. Ancient deposits, possibly from a meteorite impact thousands of years ago. The caves protected them from degradation. Dr. Weiss focused intently on the patterns on James's skin. The dust you inhaled contained microscopic particles of these crystals. In most people, the body's natural defenses eliminate foreign particles effectively. But you always had an unusual physiology. Remember how you never got the typical vaccinate reactions that affected other Marines? James nodded slowly. His resistance to illness and environmental factors had been a point of pride during his service. "We think your body didn't reject the particles," Dr. Weiss continued, his voice clinical but with an undertone of fascination. "Instead, it's been integrating them at a cellular level. The process has been dormant until recently. Something activated it." Dr. Raymond approached with what looked like a specialized microscope mounted on an articulated arm. "We need to look at the cellular structure directly," she explained, positioning the device over his forearm. "This won't hurt, but you'll feel some pressure." As the microscope made contact with his skin, its display screen showed a magnified image of the affected area. What James saw made his breath catch in his throat. The geometric patterns weren't just on the surface of his skin. They extended deep into the tissue, forming complex three-dimensional structures that pulsed with faint internal light. "My God," Dr. Raymond whispered, adjusting the magnification. "It's reconfiguring the cellular matrix. I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Weiss leaned closer to the screen, his professional demeanor slipping slightly to reveal genuine awe. "The pattern, they're not random. They appear to be..." Before he could finish his thought, the patterns on the screen began to shift, the geometric shapes rearranging themselves as if responding to the observation. Simultaneously, James felt a surge of burning pain radiating from every affected area of his body. "It's reacting to the examination," he gasped, gripping the edges of the table. The monitoring equipment surrounding them suddenly erupted with alarms, screens flashing with warnings as the readings spiked beyond predetermined parameters. One of the technicians stared at his display in disbelief. "Doctor, you need to see this," he called urgently. "The spectrographic analysis, it's showing energy signatures that shouldn't be possible in organic tissue." Dr. Raymond moved quickly to the technician's station, her composure finally cracking as she viewed the results. "This can't be right," she murmured, running the analysis again. The second result matched the first, and she turned to Dr. Weiss with an expression of mingled fear and scientific amazement. "Alexander," she said, using his first name for the first time. "It's not just integrating, it's transforming. The cellular structure is being converted into something that shares properties with both biological tissue and the crystalline material. And it's accelerating." Dr. Weiss's face paled as the implications of Dr. Raymond's words sank in. He turned to the medical team with newfound urgency. "I want a full biohazard protocol initiated, level 4 containment. No one enters or leaves this section without my direct authorization." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from clinical curiosity to controlled emergency. Staff moved with practiced efficiency, securing equipment and activating additional systems built into the walls. Hermetic seals hissed into place around the doorframes as the ventilation system switched to a closed filtration cycle. James watched this transformation with mounting dread. As a combat veteran, he recognized the signs of a situation spiraling beyond control. The clipped communications, the careful avoidance of alarming words, the way the medical personnel positioned themselves strategically around the room. "Am I contagious?" he asked, needing to know if he posed a threat to others. Dr. Raymond and Dr. Weiss exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that specialists share when deciding how much to tell a patient. "Not in the conventional sense, Doctor," Raymond finally answered. "We don't believe this is transmissible through normal contact, but given the unknown nature of what we're dealing with, containment is the prudent approach until we understand more." James wasn't satisfied with this carefully worded non-answer. "What exactly is happening to me? In plain English, not medical jargon." Dr. Weiss sighed, removing his gloves and approaching the examination table. "The crystalline material you were exposed to in Afghanistan appears to have properties we don't fully understand. It seems to be capable of reprogramming human cellular structure. The patterns on your skin aren't just a rash or an allergic reaction. They're more like a rewriting of your biological code. Rewriting? James repeated, the word hanging ominously in the sterile air. Into what? That's what we need to find out, Dr. Weiss replied. The process has been dormant for years, presumably integrating at a microscopic level without causing noticeable changes. Something triggered an acceleration recently. Have you experienced any major physical trauma, extreme stress, or exposure to unusual environmental factors in the past few months? James thought carefully. His life had been relatively stable since settling in Pinecrest, teaching, hiking, the occasional fishing trip. Nothing that would qualify as extreme stress by the standards of someone who had survived combat deployments. Nothing unusual, he began, then stopped as a memory surfaced. Wait, about 6 weeks ago I was caught in a thunderstorm while hiking. Lightning struck a tree about 50 yards from where I was taking shelter. The strike was close enough that I felt the electrical charge in the air. My watch stopped working, and I had a metallic taste in my mouth for hours afterward. Dr. Raymond looked up sharply from the monitor she was studying. Intense electromagnetic exposure. That could potentially have activated dormant particles, especially if they have properties similar to certain piezoelectric crystals that respond to electrical stimulation. She turned to one of the technicians. Run a full-spectrum electromagnetic scan. Look for any emissions or resonance patterns coming from the affected tissue. As the technician adjusted the equipment, Dr. Weiss continued his examination of the patterns on James's arm, photographing them from multiple angles and comparing them to the earlier images James had sent. The progression is accelerating, he noted, his clinical tone belied by the tension in his shoulders. The patterns here are significantly more complex than they were just hours ago. They appear to be forming some kind of coherent system, almost like circuitry. Circuitry? James echoed, his mind struggling to process the implications. You're saying these patterns are like electronic components? Not electronic in the conventional sense, Dr. Raymond clarified, studying the new scan results. But they appear to be channels capable of conducting and processing energy, similar to a nervous system, but with properties we don't fully understand. One of the junior doctors who had been analyzing tissue samples suddenly called out from his station. Dr. Weiss, Dr. Raymond, you need to see this immediately. Both senior physicians moved quickly to his workstation, where a high-resolution microscope displayed a real-time image of cells from James's affected tissue. James couldn't see the screen from his position, but the reactions of the medical team told him enough. Dr. Raymond's hand went to her mouth in shock, while Dr. Weiss leaned in closer, his entire body rigid with tension. That's impossible, Dr. Weiss whispered, though in the silent room his words carried clearly to James. The cellular mitochondria are being completely restructured. Not just restructured, the junior doctor corrected, his voice trembling slightly. They're being replaced with what appears to be microscopic versions of the crystalline structures from the Shah-e-Kot caves. And they're generating energy through an unknown process. Dr. Raymond turned to look at James, her scientific composure cracking to reveal genuine fear. Mr. Mercer, your cells are no longer entirely human. They're becoming hybrids of human tissue and the alien crystalline material. The word alien hung in the air, its implications too vast to immediately process. James had expected a diagnosis of some exotic disease, perhaps even a military bioweapon he'd been unknowingly exposed to. But this was beyond anything he had mentally prepared for. Can you reverse it, he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Years of sniper training had taught him to control his external responses, to keep his breathing measured and his hands steady even as his mind raced. The silence that followed his question was answer enough. We don't know. Dr. Weiss finally admitted. This is unprecedented in medical science. The process appears to be self-sustaining now, with each converted cell acting as a catalyst for transforming adjacent tissue. Am I dying? James asked bluntly. Doctor. Raymond approached him, choosing her words carefully. Not in any conventional sense. Your vital signs are actually remarkably stable, and the affected tissues show no signs of necrosis or degradation. If anything, they appear to be more resilient than normal human tissue, but they're changing in fundamental ways we don't understand. As if to underscore her words, a sudden wave of sensation swept through James's body. Not pain exactly, but an intense awareness of every affected area, as if each patch of transformed skin had suddenly come online. The sensation was accompanied by a visible reaction in the patterns, which briefly glowed with a subtle luminescence that was clearly visible even under the bright examination lights. The monitoring equipment around the room erupted with new alerts, screens displaying rapidly changing readings that sent the medical team into controlled chaos. Energy spike across all affected areas, one technician called out. Coherent patterns detected. Cellular transformation rate increasing by 200%, another reported, his voice strained. Dr. Weiss moved quickly to James's side. What are you feeling right now? Any pain, disorientation, unusual thoughts? James focused inward, cataloging his sensations with the methodical precision that had made him an exceptional sniper. No pain. There's a humming sensation, like standing too close to high-voltage power lines. I can feel each affected area distinctly, like they're awakening. He paused, struggling to articulate a sensation he'd never experienced before. It's as if parts of me are coming online, becoming aware in a way that's separate from my normal consciousness. Dr. Raymond exchanged a significant look with Dr. Weiss. Neurological integration, she said quietly. The patterns are connecting to his nervous system. One of the technicians monitoring James's neural activity called out an alarm. Brain scan, showing unusual activity in the temporal lobe and hippocampus. There's something like a feedback loop forming between the transformed tissue and specific brain regions. James felt a flutter of panic, quickly suppressed by his military discipline. The idea of something foreign interfacing with his brain crossed a threshold from disturbing to terrifying. What does that mean? Is it affecting my mind? Dr. Weiss's face was grim. We can't be certain yet. The temporal lobe and hippocampus are associated with memory processing and integration. It's possible that whatever is happening is accessing your memories, perhaps as part of understanding your neural architecture. Or communicating, Dr. Raymond added softly, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her caution. Communicating, James repeated. You think this transformation is intelligent? Not necessarily conscious intelligence as we understand it, Dr. Raymond clarified. But the patterns we're seeing suggest an organized process with feedback mechanisms. It's responding to stimuli and adapting its approach. That indicates at least a form of emergent intelligence, similar to how complex computer systems can appear to learn without true consciousness. As they spoke, James became aware of a new sensation, a subtle pressure at the base of his skull, not painful but insistent, like the feeling of a word on the tip of his tongue. He tried to focus on it, and as he did, the patterns across his skin pulsed in unison. Something's happening, he said, his voice tight with concentration. I can feel something trying to access my thoughts. The monitors tracking his brain activity confirmed his subjective experience, displaying unprecedented patterns of neural firing that spread from the temporal lobe to the frontal cortex, the area associated with conscious thought and decision-making. Doctor, Weiss turned to one of the senior technicians. Prepare a targeted EMP device. If this goes south, we need to be able to disrupt whatever energy patterns are emerging. The technician nodded grimly and moved to a secure cabinet on the far wall of the laboratory. James watched as he input a complex code and removed what looked like a specialized weapon, sleek and clinical in design, but unmistakably a weapon nonetheless. The sight sent a chill through James. He'd seen enough classified military technology to recognize when something had been developed for containment of threats beyond conventional understanding. The fact that such a device was readily available in this facility spoke volumes about what they might have been expecting or what they had encountered before. "Have you seen this before?" he asked Dr. Weiss directly. "Has this happened to others?" Dr. Weiss hesitated, clearly weighing his response against security protocols. "Not exactly this," he finally answered. "There have been other incidents involving the crystalline material from the Shai-Kot caves. Different manifestations, different outcomes, none precisely like what we're seeing with you." "What happened to them?" James pressed. "The other affected individuals?" Before Dr. Weiss could answer, one of the monitors tracking James's condition emitted a high-pitched alert. The geometric patterns on his skin began to move more actively, rearranging themselves into increasingly complex configurations that spread visibly across his forearm, even as they watched. "The transformation is accelerating exponentially," Dr. Raymond announced, her voice clinical despite the alarm in her eyes. "At this rate, complete cellular conversion of major systems will occur within hours, not days, as we initially projected." Dr. Weiss made a decision, turning to the assembled medical team. "Prepare for emergency intervention. I want a chemical suppressant ready immediately, the experimental compound we developed after the Kandahar incident." "That hasn't been tested on humans," Dr. Raymond objected, lowering her voice though James could still hear her clearly. "The side effects could be catastrophic. More catastrophic than complete cellular transformation by an alien agent," Dr. Weiss countered grimly. "We're out of options, Eleanor." As they argued, James became aware of something strange happening inside his mind. The pressure at the base of his skull had intensified, transforming into a kind of presence. Not words exactly, but concepts, impressions that weren't his own. He had the distinct sensation of being observed from within, as if something was sifting through his consciousness, learning, adapting. And then, with shocking clarity, a single concept formed in his mind. Not enemy. Symbiosis. "Wait!" James called, out, his voice cutting through the tense discussions around him. "Something's communicating with me." The room fell silent, all attention focusing on him. I don't know how to explain this," James continued, struggling to translate the alien impressions into words. "It's not trying to harm me, it's trying to integrate. Coexist." Dr. Weiss approached cautiously. "You're receiving direct communication from the transformation process?" James nodded, concentrating on the strange presence in his mind. "Not in words, in concepts, impressions. It's ancient. It's been dormant for a very long time, waiting for a compatible host." "Why you?" Dr. Raymond asked, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her concern. "What makes you compatible when others weren't?" James focused inward again, seeking an answer from the alien presence. The response came as a series of impressions that he slowly translated into words. "My physiology. The same factors that made me resistant to environmental conditions in Afghanistan. My cellular structure has some rare characteristic that allows for successful integration without rejection. The iron constitution," Dr. Weiss murmured. "We always attributed your resilience to superior genetics and conditioning, but there must be something more fundamental at the cellular level." As they spoke, the technician monitoring James's vitals suddenly straightened in alarm. "Doctor, his core temperature is rising rapidly. 100.2, 101.5, 102.8 and climbing." James felt it, a heat building from within, radiating outward from his core. Not a fever in the conventional sense, but a controlled, purposeful warming. The patterns on his skin began to glow more intensely, pulsing in a coordinated rhythm that spread across his entire body. "What's happening?" Dr. Raymond demanded, moving quickly to check the monitors. Before anyone could answer, James arched suddenly on the examination table. His body rigid as a wave of energy visibly coursed through the geometric patterns on his skin. The laboratory lights flickered, and several pieces of monitoring equipment shut down completely. In the moment of darkness before the emergency generators engaged, James's transformed skin illuminated the room with an eerie, crystalline glow. The patterns had spread to cover nearly 60% of his visible body surface, forming an intricate network of luminescent lines that pulsed with what looked like flowing energy. When the lights returned, Dr. Weiss was staring at James with an expression of scientific awe overriding his professional detachment. "My God," he whispered. The technician who had prepared the EMP device raised it uncertainly, looking to Dr. Weiss for instruction. The senior physician hesitated, clearly torn between established containment protocols and the unprecedented nature of what they were witnessing. "Stand down," he finally ordered, "but stay ready." James lay still on the examination table, breathing heavily as the wave of energy subsided. The patterns on his skin continued to glow, but more softly now, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He turned his head to look at Dr. Weiss, his eyes reflecting the same crystalline luminescence that covered his skin. "It's not trying to convert me entirely," he said, his voice eerily calm. "It's creating a hybrid state, part human, part something else. A symbiotic relationship." Dr. Raymond approached cautiously, scientific curiosity warring with caution. "James, can you tell us what it wants? Why is this happening?" James closed his eyes, focusing on the alien presence that now seemed intertwined with his own consciousness. When he opened them again, there was a new awareness in his gaze, something ancient and distinctly non-human looking out through human eyes. "To survive," he said simply, "and to share knowledge it believes we'll need." "Knowledge of what?" Dr. Weiss asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James turned to him, the patterns on his skin pulsing more intensely as he spoke words that were clearly not entirely his own. "Of what's coming, of what's been watching us from the dark spaces between stars, of why its kind left these crystals on Earth thousands of years ago as tools for the time when humanity would need them." Dr. Raymond's scientific skepticism finally reasserted itself. "You're claiming these crystalline structures were deliberately placed on Earth as some kind of preparation for humanity?" "Not for humanity specifically," James replied. "The alien concept's difficult to translate into human language. For any compatible species that evolved on this planet. The crystals were left on many worlds, seeded across this galaxy as a defensive measure against something ancient and predatory that moves between star systems." The assembled medical team exchanged glances, scientific training colliding with the sheer impossibility of what they were hearing. Dr. Weiss alone seemed less surprised than the others, his expression grim with what looked like reluctant recognition. "You've encountered this before," James said, not a question but a statement of fact. The alien presence within him seemed to provide insights beyond his normal perception, allowing him to read subtle cues in Dr. Weiss's expression and body language. "You know what I'm talking about." Dr. Weiss glanced at the other medical staff, then made a decision. "Clear the room," he ordered, "except for Dr. Raymond. This conversation is now classified Level Echo 9. The technicians and junior doctors exchanged uncertain looks, but years of working in a facility where secrecy was paramount had conditioned them to follow orders without question. Within moments, they had filed out of the laboratory, leaving only James, Dr. Weiss, and Dr. Raymond. Dr. Weiss waited until the hermetic door sealed behind the last staff member, then turned to James with a new intensity. What you're experiencing is connected to something we've been studying for decades, under the deepest levels of classification. The Shah-e-Kot caves were just one site. There are others. In Siberia, the Gobi Desert, deep in the Amazon basin, and beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Dr. Raymond's eyes widened. Alexander, this goes beyond our clearance levels. The Antarctic site is directly relevant to what's happening to Mercer. Dr. Weiss cut her off. And given his condition, conventional security protocols no longer apply. He returned his attention to James. In 1938, a German expedition discovered crystalline formations in Antarctica, similar to what you encountered in Afghanistan. They brought samples back to Berlin for study. By 1943, Nazi scientists had managed to activate these crystals using experimental electromagnetic equipment. James felt the alien presence in his mind stir with interest, providing impressions that he translated into speech. They achieved partial integration with human subjects, but the process was flawed, unstable. Dr. Weiss stared at him with a mixture of fascination and unease. Yes, how could you possibly know that? I don't know it, James replied. It does. He gestured to the glowing patterns on his skin. The crystalline intelligence contains accumulated knowledge from all its encounters. Dr. Raymond sat down heavily on a nearby stool, her scientific worldview visibly shaken. You're suggesting this is some form of distributed consciousness, that all these crystalline formations across Earth are connected. Not actively connected in their dormant state, James explained, parsing the alien concepts flooding his mind. But each instance contains the collective memory of the whole. When integration occurs with a compatible host, that memory becomes accessible. Dr. Weiss nodded slowly, as if James's words confirmed something he had long suspected. After World War II, Operation Paperclip brought those Nazi scientists and their research to the United States. The program that evolved from their work has operated under various code names over the decades. Currently, it's called Project Luminous. And you're part of it, James stated. A consultant only, Dr. Weiss clarified. My primary role has been treating military personnel who experienced adverse effects from exposure to the crystalline material. Until you, the results of human contact have been less successful. James processed this, feeling the alien presence provide context to Dr. Weiss's careful understatement. They suffered rapid cellular degeneration. The transformation process began, but couldn't stabilize, resulting in system-wide failure. They died, Dr. Raymond said bluntly, her scientific detachment momentarily abandoned. Horribly, Dr. Weiss nodded grimly. Dozens of subjects over the decades, which is why your case is so extraordinary, Mercer. You're the first human to achieve stable integration with the crystalline consciousness. As they spoke, James became aware of a new sensation. The patterns on his skin were increasing in complexity, the geometric shapes evolving into what resembled mathematical equations and three-dimensional models of atomic structures. The glow pulsed in rhythm with his breathing, and he could feel energy flowing through the network, changing him in fundamental ways that his human mind couldn't fully comprehend. It's accelerating again, Dr. Raymond observed, watching the transformation, with scientific fascination overriding her fear. The patterns are evolving into something far more complex. James closed his eyes, focusing inward on the alien presence that now shared his consciousness. When he opened them again, his voice carried a new resonance, as if two beings were speaking in careful harmony. What you call Project Luminous has merely scratched the surface of understanding. The Nazi experiments were crude attempts to weaponize something they couldn't comprehend. The United States continued this approach, seeing only military applications for a technology that was never meant for warfare. Dr. Weiss straightened, his expression sharpening. What was it meant for then? Preservation, James replied, the word carrying layers of meaning beyond its human definition. The crystalline vessels were created by a civilization that faced extinction from a cosmic predator, a force that consumes the life energy of entire worlds. They seeded compatible planets with these vessels, containing their consciousness and technology as a warning system and defense mechanism. Dr. Raymond leaned forward, scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. You're claiming Earth is in danger from some kind of interstellar predator? Not immediately, James clarified, accessing information from the alien consciousness. The threat moves slowly by human standards, taking millennia to traverse the void between star systems. But it has entered our solar system's outer boundary. Within 2 human generations, it will reach Earth unless countermeasures are deployed. Dr. Weiss exchanged a significant look with Dr. Raymond. The anomalies in the Kuiper Belt, the gravitational distortions that NASA can't explain. Yes, James confirmed. Those are its first effects as it approaches. Distortions in space-time that precede its physical manifestation. As he spoke, James felt a sudden surge of energy through the crystalline network across his body. The patterns flared with intense light, and a holographic projection emanated from his transformed skin, filling the air above the examination table, with a 3-dimensional representation of the solar system. Within this projection, a dark distortion moved slowly inward from beyond Pluto's orbit, a void in space that seemed to bend light around itself, creating an impression of negative space against the backdrop of stars. Dr. Raymond gasped, stepping back involuntarily from the display. That's impossible. Human skin can't project holographic images. This isn't human skin anymore, Dr. Weiss said quietly, transfixed by the projection. At least not entirely. The hologram zoomed in on the dark anomaly, revealing more detail. A shifting mass of what appeared to be living darkness, with tendrils that extended outward into the surrounding space, absorbing all light and matter they encountered. The visualization was accompanied by a rising sense of dread that seemed to emanate from James himself, an emotional resonance that filled the room with an almost tangible feeling of ancient fear. The Devourer, James said, the crystalline patterns flashing as he spoke. It has consumed thousands of worlds across multiple galaxies. It cannot be destroyed by conventional means. It exists partially outside normal space-time, making physical weapons useless against its core self. Then how can it be stopped? Dr. Weiss asked, his military training asserting itself in the face of a defined threat. The holographic projection shifted, showing crystalline structures similar to those in James's skin arranged in complex geometric patterns across a planetary surface. As they watched, these structures activated in unison, creating a field of energy that enveloped the approaching darkness, containing it and then somehow folding it back upon itself until it collapsed into nothingness. The crystalline technology creates a phase-shifted energy barrier that can isolate and collapse the Devourer's dimensional anchor points, James explained, though it was clear he was translating alien concepts into imperfect human language. But this requires a planetary-scale network of integrated nodes, each hosted within a compatible biological form. Dr. Raymond's scientific mind quickly grasped the implication. You're saying we need more people like you? More human crystal hybrids? Yes, James confirmed. Thousands strategically positioned across Earth's surface, creating a defensive lattice that can be activated when the Devourer approaches. "And if we don't do this?" Dr. Weiss asked. The hologram changed again, showing Earth being enveloped by the dark anomaly. The planet's surface blackened, as if being consumed from within, oceans boiling away, atmosphere stripping off into space. The visualization was clinical in its presentation, but horrifying in its implications. Complete planetary death, with every living thing converted into energy to feed the cosmic predator. "This is why the crystalline vessels were left here," James said, his voice resonating with the ancient consciousness sharing his mind. "Not as weapons to be used against other humans, but as a defense system against an existential threat that returns to this galaxy in predictable cycles." Dr. Weiss paced the length of the laboratory, processing the implications of what he was hearing. "This goes beyond anything Project Luminous has theorized. The military applications have always been the focus. Enhanced soldiers, new weapons, technologies, tactical advantages in conventional warfare." "Short-sighted," James said, the alien presence adding an edge of criticism to his tone. "Using star-forged tools to fight tribal conflicts while the forest fire approaches." The holographic projection faded as James's energy levels visibly dropped. The patterns on his skin continued to glow, but dimmed somewhat, and he sagged against the examination table, the effort of maintaining the alien communication clearly taking a physical toll. Dr. Raymond moved quickly to check his vital signs. His heart rate is elevated, and he's showing signs of metabolic stress. The transformation process must require significant energy reserves. Dr. Weiss nodded, his decision-making calculus visibly shifting as he processed the new information. "Get him stabilized. He needs nutrition, hydration, and rest. And contact Director Harrington immediately. She needs to hear this directly." As Dr. Raymond prepared an IV solution, enriched with glucose and electrolytes, James felt the alien presence recede slightly, returning to a background awareness rather than the direct communication they had been sharing. The feeling was similar to the mental fatigue after intense concentration, a need to process and integrate rather than continue active exchange. "It's pulling back," he murmured, his voice returning to its normal cadence. "Conserving energy while the transformation continues." Doctor Weiss leaned over him, all pretense of clinical detachment gone. "Mercer, James, are you still yourself? How much of your original consciousness remains intact?" James considered the question carefully, taking inventory of his thoughts and memories. "I'm still me," he said finally. "It's not replacing me, just adding to what's already here. My memories, personality, identity, they're unchanged. But I now have access to knowledge that isn't mine, perspectives that are alien to human experience. A true symbiosis," Dr. Raymond said wonderingly as she connected the IV to James's arm. "Not parasitic or invasive, but cooperative." "That was always the intention," James explained, feeling the alien knowledge surface briefly before subsiding. Again, the crystalline vessels were designed to work with compatible organisms, not to override them. The compatibility is rare, though. Specific genetic markers and neurochemical profiles that appear in less than 1% of humans. Dr. Weiss processed this information with a strategist's mind. So even if Project Luminous wanted to create an army of integrated soldiers, they couldn't. The compatible hosts are too rare. "Correct," James confirmed. "And forced integration with incompatible hosts results in what you've already seen, systemic failure and death." As the nutrient solution flowed into his bloodstream, James felt his energy levels begin to stabilize. The crystalline patterns across his skin settled into a steady, pulsing glow that synchronized with his heartbeat. He could feel the transformation continuing internally, reshaping his cellular structure in ways that his human understanding couldn't fully comprehend. But the process no longer seemed as draining or disruptive. Dr. Raymond studied the monitoring equipment, which had been recalibrated to track his unique physiological state. Remarkable. Your cellular energy production has increased by nearly 300%. The transformed tissues are generating power through some mechanism we can't identify, supplementing your normal metabolic processes. It's drawing energy from quantum fluctuations, James explained, translating another snippet of alien knowledge. Harvesting zero-point energy at the cellular level. Dr. Weiss shook his head in amazement. Technology, thousands of years beyond our current understanding, encoded into crystalline structures and designed to integrate with compatible biology. The military applications alone are secondary to the primary purpose. James interrupted, the alien presence briefly resurging with enough force to make the crystalline patterns flare. This gift wasn't left to give one human tribe an advantage over others. It was left to ensure the survival of all life on this planet. Before Dr. Weiss could respond, the laboratory's communication system activated with an urgent tone. A woman's voice, authoritative and tense, filled the room. Dr. Weiss, this is Director Harrington. I've reviewed the preliminary data from your examination of Sergeant Mercer. A containment team is en route to your location. The subject is to be secured and transported to the Antarctic facility immediately. Acknowledge. The term subject sent a chill through James, triggering combat. Instincts honed through years of military service. The alien presence within him responded to his spike of adrenaline. The crystalline patterns flaring with sudden intensity and emitting a field of energy that disrupted the communication system with a burst of static. Dr. Weiss stared at the now silent speaker, then at James, whose transformed skin now pulsed with defensive energy. That wasn't necessary, he said carefully. Director Harrington isn't your enemy. She sees me as a specimen, not a person, James replied. The crystalline networks across his body settling into a state of readiness, similar to how he had once prepared his rifle before a combat operation, not firing but ready to do so at a moment's notice. And based on your own statements about previous subjects, I have reason to believe my well-being isn't her primary concern. Dr. Raymond moved to stand between them, her scientific objectivity warring with her ethical training as a physician. Both of you need to de-escalate. Dr. Weiss, you know the Antarctic facility's protocols for unique specimens. They're not compatible with patient rights or medical ethics. And James, while your concerns are valid, Dr. Weiss isn't the one who made that decision. The tense standoff was interrupted by a new development. The crystalline patterns on James's skin began to shift again, forming what appeared to be a map of the Harrington Institute complex. Certain areas pulsed with greater intensity, including what looked like an underground level not visible from the surface. There are more, James said suddenly, the alien consciousness providing him with information he couldn't possibly have. Known. More crystalline samples stored in a vault 3 levels below us, and something else, a partially integrated host, kept in stasis. She's been there for years. Dr. Weiss's expression confirmed the truth of James's statement before he could formulate a denial. How could you possibly know that? He whispered, genuine fear entering his voice for the first time. The crystalline network is more connected than you realize, James explained, accessing knowledge that flowed through his transformed tissues. Once activated in a compatible host, it can sense other nodes in proximity, dormant or active. You have 17 primary samples in your vault, extracted from various discovery sites. And you have a woman, a soldier, who achieved partial integration after exposure at the Siberian site, but couldn't stabilize the transformation. Instead of dying, she entered a form of stasis that your scientists can't explain. Dr. Weiss's face drained of color as James revealed information that should have been impossible for him to know. The existence of the stasis subject Captain. Sophia Lynn was classified beyond even most of the Harrington Institute's senior staff. Only 6 people in the entire organization had access to that information, and James Mercer certainly wasn't one of them. Her name is Sophia, James continued, the crystalline patterns on his skin pulsing with each word, creating a subtle harmonic resonance in the air. She volunteered for a covert operation in Siberia in 2016, investigating what your team believed was an abandoned Soviet research facility. But the Russians hadn't abandoned it. They had sealed it after losing control of their own integration experiments. Dr. Raymond turned to Dr. Weiss, her scientific curiosity overpowering her fear. Alexander, is this true? The Russians achieved integration before us. Dr. Weiss nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving James. Partial integration only. Their subjects all died, except for one who disappeared. The facility was deemed contaminated and sealed with lead shielding in 1978. Until Captain Lynn's team breached the containment in 2016, James added, the alien knowledge flowing through him like a current. They believed the site had been abandoned after a radiation leak. Instead, they found crystalline formations similar to those in the Shah-e-Kot caves, but altered by Soviet experiments. When Sophia touched a fractured crystal, the integration process began immediately. Unlike the others on her team, she didn't die, but she couldn't complete the transformation either. She entered a self-induced stasis, Dr. Weiss confirmed, reluctantly. A state between human and whatever these crystals represent. We've kept her in a controlled environment, studying her condition, trying to understand what went wrong or right, depending on your perspective. She sees me as a specimen, not a person, James replied, the crystalline networks across his body settling into a state of readiness, similar to how he had once prepared his rifle before a combat operation, not firing but ready to do so at a moment's notice. And based on your own statements about previous subjects, I have reason to believe my well-being isn't her primary concern. Dr. Raymond moved to stand between them, her scientific objectivity warring with her ethical training as a physician. Both of you need to de-escalate. Dr. Weiss, you know the Antarctic facility's protocols for unique specimens. They're not compatible with patient rights or medical ethics. And James, while your concerns are valid, Dr. Weiss isn't the one who made that decision. The tense standoff was interrupted by a new development. The crystalline patterns on James's skin began to shift again, forming what appeared to be a map of the Harrington Institute complex. Certain areas pulsed with greater intensity, including what looked like an underground level not visible from the surface. There are more, James said suddenly, the alien consciousness providing him with information he couldn't possibly have. Known. More crystalline samples stored in a vault 3 levels below us, and something else, a partially integrated host, kept in stasis. She's been there for years. Dr. Weiss's expression confirmed the truth of James's statement before he could formulate a denial. How could you possibly know that? He whispered, genuine fear entering his voice for the first time. The crystalline network is more connected than you realize, James explained, accessing knowledge that flowed through his transformed tissues. Once activated in a compatible host, it can sense other nodes in proximity, dormant or active. You have 17 primary samples in your vault, extracted from various discovery sites. And you have a woman, a soldier, who achieved partial integration after exposure at the Siberian site, but couldn't stabilize the transformation. Instead of dying, she entered a form of stasis that your scientists can't explain. Dr. Weiss's face drained of color as James revealed information that should have been impossible for him to know. The existence of the stasis subject, Captain Sophia Lynn, was classified beyond even most of the Harrington Institute's senior staff. Only 6 people in the entire organization had access to that information, and James Mercer certainly wasn't one of them. Her name is Sophia, James continued, the crystalline patterns on his skin pulsing with each word, creating a subtle harmonic resonance in the air. She volunteered for a covert operation in Siberia in 2016, investigating what your team believed was an abandoned Soviet research facility. But the Russians hadn't abandoned it. They had sealed it after losing control of their own integration experiments. Dr. Raymond turned to Dr. Weiss, her scientific curiosity overpowering her fear. Alexander, is this true? The Russians achieved integration before us. Dr. Weiss nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving James. Partial integration only. Their subjects all died, except for one who disappeared. The facility was deemed contaminated and sealed with lead shielding in 1978. Until Captain Lin's team breached the containment in 2016, James added, the alien knowledge flowing through him like a current. They believed the site had been abandoned after a radiation leak. Instead, they found crystalline formations similar to those in the Shah-e-Kot caves, but altered by Soviet experiments. When Sophia touched a fractured crystal, the integration process began immediately. Unlike the others on her team, she didn't die, but she couldn't complete the transformation either. She entered a self-induced stasis, Dr. Weiss confirmed, reluctantly. A state between human and whatever these crystals represent. We've kept her in a controlled environment, studying her condition, trying to understand what went wrong or right, depending on your perspective. And now you have me, James said, understanding dawning. The first successful integration. No wonder Director Harrington wants me in Antarctic containment. I'm the breakthrough Project Luminous has been working toward for decades. The laboratory's communication system crackled back to life, bypassing the disruption James had created. Director Harrington's voice filled the room again, harder and more commanding than before. Dr. Weiss, security footage shows unauthorized information sharing and failure to implement containment protocols. The subject is demonstrating capabilities beyond your initial assessment. Containment Team ETA 4 minutes. Prepare the subject for immediate sedation and transport. James sat up on the examination table, the IV line pulling taut with his movement. The crystalline patterns across his skin brightened in response to the perceived threat, creating a subtle field of energy that caused the nearest monitoring equipment to flicker. I'm not going to any Antarctic facility, he stated, his voice carrying the dual resonance of human determination and alien power. And I'm not a subject to be sedated and transported. Dr. Raymond moved quickly to stand between James and the laboratory door. This is escalating too rapidly, she said, addressing both James and Dr. Weiss. We need to de-escalate before the containment team arrives, or this could turn violent. Dr. Weiss's military training and scientific curiosity were clearly at war. Within him, he glanced at the security cameras, then made a decision, reaching up to disable the one mounted in the corner of the laboratory. Listen carefully, he said urgently, keeping his voice low. The containment team won't be negotiating. They have orders to secure you by any means necessary, including lethal force if you resist. These aren't regular security personnel. They're specialized operators trained to handle anomalous threats. Like me, James said flatly. Yes, Dr. Weiss acknowledged. But you don't have to be a threat, James. What's happening to you is extraordinary, potentially the most significant scientific breakthrough in human history. If you cooperate with the research program, we can ensure your safety and comfort. While studying the integration process, James laughed, a short, bitter sound. Studying me in a containment cell in Antarctica while Project Luminous figures out how to weaponize this gift against other humans instead of using it for its intended purpose. The crystalline patterns on his skin pulsed with his rising emotion, emitting a subtle harmonic tone that made the glass beakers on a nearby shelf vibrate. That's not going to happen. Dr. Raymond checked the monitors tracking James's condition. Your energy output is increasing dramatically with your emotional state. Whatever you're planning, you need to be careful. We don't know the limits of your transformed physiology. I know, James replied, the alien consciousness providing information that his human mind translated into understanding. The integration is still stabilizing. Pushing too hard could disrupt the process. Dr. Weiss glanced anxiously at the laboratory door. The containment team will be here any moment. If you're not going to cooperate, you need to make a decision now about how this confrontation plays out. James closed his eyes briefly, communing with the alien presence that shared his consciousness. When he opened them again, they glowed with the same crystalline luminescence that covered his skin. I need to see her, he said. Captain Lin, the partially integrated host. She's part of this puzzle, perhaps the key to understanding why my integration succeeded where others failed. That's impossible, Dr. Weiss objected. The stasis chamber is in the most secure section of the facility, beyond multiple layers of security. Even if I wanted to take you there, we'd never make it past the containment team. We don't need to go through them, James said with quiet confidence. The crystalline patterns on his body shifted, forming new configurations that seemed to map the structure of the building around them. There are maintenance tunnels connecting each wing of the facility, designed as emergency evacuation routes. One passes directly beneath this laboratory, accessible through a service hatch in the storage closet. Dr. Weiss stared at him in disbelief. How could you possibly know that? The crystalline consciousness doesn't just provide abstract knowledge, James explained, sliding off the examination table and removing the IV from his arm with practiced ease. It can sense physical structures, energy patterns, the flow of currents through the building's systems. I can see pathways that aren't visible to normal human perception. Dr. Raymond looked from James to Dr. Weiss, scientific fascination warring with professional caution. Alexander, we can't just let him. We don't have a choice, Dr. Weiss interrupted grimly. Once he's in Antarctic containment, we'll never get answers about the true purpose of these crystalline structures. The military will classify everything, focus on weapons applications, and ignore the bigger picture. He turned to James. You said this technology was created as a defense against something approaching our solar system. Something that threatens all life on Earth. I need to know more about that before I decide where my loyalties lie. James nodded, respecting the physician's dilemma. The storage closet, he said, moving toward a nondescript door at the back of the laboratory. The service hatch is beneath the shelving unit against the far wall. As Dr. Weiss hesitated, the facility's alarm system suddenly activated, a pulsing red light accompanied by a low, insistent tone that indicated a security breach. Through the laboratory's small observation window, they could see armed personnel in tactical gear moving rapidly down the corridor toward their location. Decision time, Doctor, James said calmly. Help me reach Captain Lin or step aside. Dr. Weiss locked eyes with Dr. Raymond, some unspoken communication passing between the two scientists who had worked together for years. Then he nodded decisively and moved toward the storage closet. Help me move this shelving unit, he instructed, gripping one side of the heavy metal structure. James joined him, and together they shifted the shelving away from the wall, revealing a maintenance hatch set. Into the floor, the metal cover was secured with electronic locks, but as James placed his hand near the control panel, the crystalline patterns on his skin emitted a focused pulse of energy that caused the locking mechanism to disengage with a soft click. Electromagnetic manipulation, Dr. Raymond observed, her scientific mind still cataloging James's abilities despite the crisis unfolding around them. The crystalline structures are capable of generating directed energy fields. Among other things, James confirmed, lifting the hatch to reveal a narrow service tunnel below. The sound of the containment team was now just outside the laboratory door, the metallic click of weapons being readied. the low murmur of tactical communications. Dr. Weiss made a quick decision. Eleanor, you need to stay here. Claim I forced you to help us escape. You'll be more valuable continuing your research from inside the system than becoming a fugitive with us. Dr. Raymond started to object, but James cut her off. He's right. Someone needs to remain in a position to influence Project Luminous if this goes badly. And you'll be the only one who truly understands what's happening to me from a scientific perspective. She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The rest of my research team doesn't have enough information to piece this together yet. I can delay. Them create confusion about what's really happening with the integration process. Thank you, James said simply, then turned to Dr. Weiss. After you, Doctor. Dr. Weiss lowered himself into the maintenance tunnel, and James followed, pulling the hatch closed above them just as the laboratory door burst open and the containment team swarmed into the room. Through the metal barrier, they could hear Dr. Raymond's voice, pitched high with convincing distress, claiming that Dr. Weiss had lost his mind and helped the subject escape. The tunnel was narrow and dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor, designed to guide evacuation during power failures. For a normal human, navigating this labyrinth would have required detailed knowledge of the facility's layout. But James moved with confident precision, the crystalline patterns on his skin providing enough illumination to light their way, while also guiding his path through the complex network of service corridors. 3 levels down, he said quietly, leading Dr. Weiss toward a maintenance ladder that descended into the darkness below. The stasis chamber is in the southeast quadrant of sub-level 3, adjacent to the crystal storage vault. Dr. Weiss followed, his expression a mixture of scientific fascination and growing unease. The integration has given you perfect knowledge of our facility's layout. What else can you perceive? Everything connected to the facility's electronic systems, James replied as they descended the ladder. Security protocols, power distribution, communication networks, and I can sense the dormant crystalline samples in your vault. 17 primary specimens and 32 secondary fragments, each with its own unique energy signature. They reached the bottom of the ladder and continued through a horizontal section of the maintenance tunnel. Above them, alarm systems continued to sound, and they could hear the distant echo of the containment team's search operations spreading throughout the facility. They'll figure out we're in the maintenance system soon enough, Dr. Weiss observed grimly. These tunnels are included in their containment protocols. We won't be in the tunnels much longer, James assured him, stopping at a junction where a ventilation shaft intersected with their path. This shaft leads directly to the anteroom of the secure storage section. It's too small for normal maintenance access, but I can reconfigure my cellular density temporarily to navigate it. Reconfigure your cellular density, Dr. Weiss repeated incredulously. That's not biologically possible. James smiled slightly, the alien knowledge flowing through him, providing capabilities beyond human limitation. The crystalline integration alters the fundamental properties of matter. Watch. The patterns across his skin intensified, emitting a harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate with his entire body. Before Dr. Weiss's astonished eyes, James's form became less solid, his outline blurring slightly as his cellular structure shifted to a state that was neither fully solid nor fully gaseous, something in between that defied conventional physics. My God, Dr. Weiss whispered, witnessing capabilities that went far beyond anything Project Luminous had theorized possible. I'll clear the path and disable the security systems, James said, his voice resonating strangely in his semi-solid state. Follow the ventilation shaft to the first right turn, then wait for my signal. Before Dr. Weiss could object, James flowed into the ventilation shaft, his transformed body adapting to the confined space in a way that no human form could achieve. The crystalline light of his patterns disappeared into the darkness, leaving Dr. Weiss alone in the maintenance tunnel with only the emergency strips providing illumination. Minutes passed as the search operations continued overhead. Dr. Weiss waited tensely, aware that his career, his freedom, and possibly his life now hung in the balance of decisions he had made in the heat of the moment. After what seemed an eternity but was probably less than 5 minutes, the ventilation shaft illuminated with a soft, crystalline glow, and James's voice echoed from within. "It's clear. Follow the shaft to the right junction." Dr. Weiss hesitated, only briefly before climbing into the ventilation shaft, crawling awkwardly through the confined space that had accommodated James's transformed state with such ease. At the junction, he found a section of the shaft had been opened from below, creating an access point to a small, clinically sterile anteroom. James stood below, his body returned to its solid state, though the crystalline pattern still covered much of his visible skin. He reached up to help Dr. Weiss descend from the ventilation shaft, then quickly sealed the opening to cover their entry point. "The security systems in this section are temporarily disabled," James explained, moving toward a heavy security door with multiple electronic locks. "I've created a feedback loop in the surveillance system that will show empty rooms for the next 15 minutes. 15 minutes isn't much time," Dr. Weiss observed, watching as James placed his hand against the security panel beside the door. "It's enough," James replied with quiet confidence. The crystalline patterns on his palm pulsed with energy that interfaced directly with the electronic locking mechanism, bypassing security protocols that would have required multiple high-level authorizations. The massive door slid open silently, revealing a chamber beyond that hummed with the subtle vibration of advanced technology. The room was circular, its walls lined with monitoring equipment and specialized containment fields. In the center, suspended within what appeared to be a column of shimmering energy, floated the still form of a woman in her early 30s, dressed in what remained of a tactical operations uniform. Captain Sophia Lin hung in perfect stasis, her eyes closed, her expression peaceful. Across her exposed skin, crystalline patterns similar to James's were visible, but they were fragmented, incomplete, like a circuit board with missing connections. While James's patterns pulsed with living light, hers were static, frozen in a moment of transformation that had neither completed nor failed entirely. "She's been like this for 9 years, Dr. Weiss said quietly, approaching the stasis field with a scientist's measured caution. "Our best theories suggest that when the integration process reached a critical failure point, something within the crystalline structures initiated this suspended animation to prevent her death. We've been unable to revive her or advance the integration process." James moved closer to the stasis field, the patterns on his skin responding to the proximity of another integration attempt, brightening and shifting into new configurations. "She's not in suspended animation," he said, the alien knowledge providing insights beyond human medical understanding. "She's caught in a recursive calibration loop. The crystalline intelligence is trying to adapt to her genetic structure, but something is blocking the process, an incompatibility it can't resolve. We've run every test imaginable," Dr. Weiss said, frustration evident in his voice. "Genetic sequencing, cellular analysis, neurological mapping. We can't identify what's preventing the integration from completing." James circled the stasis field slowly, studying Captain Lin from different angles, the crystalline patterns on his skin responding to her presence like a tuning fork, resonating with a particular frequency. "The Soviet experiments," he said suddenly. "They altered the crystalline structures found in Siberia, didn't they?" Dr. Weiss nodded grimly. They were trying to enhance the military applications based on partial understanding of the technology. They exposed the crystals to radiation, electromagnetic fields, chemical agents, trying to make them more responsive to human control. They created a hybrid variant, James stated, not a question, but a certainty provided by the alien consciousness within him. One that retained the basic properties of the original crystalline intelligence, but was fragmented, incomplete. When Captain Lin came into contact with these altered crystals, she received corrupted integration protocols, like trying to install software with missing code segments. As he spoke, James moved closer to the stasis field, his transformed hand reaching out until it nearly touched the shimmering energy barrier. The crystalline patterns on his skin intensified, forming a network of light that seemed to reach toward Captain Lin's frozen form. "What are you doing?" Dr. Weiss asked sharply, alarmed by this unplanned interaction. "The integration I experienced was complete, uncorrupted," James explained, his voice taking on the dual resonance that indicated active communication with the alien consciousness. "My crystalline network contains the full integration protocols that hers lacks. I can provide the missing segments, complete the calibration sequence that's been locked in a recursive loop for 9 years." "That's too dangerous," Dr. Weiss objected, moving to intervene. "We have no idea what could happen if you interface directly with her stasis field. It could disrupt your own integration, or worse." James turned to the physician, his eyes glowing with crystalline light. "Doctor, in approximately 12 minutes, the containment team will override my disruption of the security systems and discover our location. Captain Lin deserves a chance at completion rather than eternal stasis. And we need her." The defense network requires multiple integrated nodes, individuals who can serve as connection points in the larger array. Dr. Weiss hesitated, torn between scientific caution and the extraordinary possibility before him. Finally, he stepped back. "Do it quickly, and at the first sign of instability in your own integration, you need to break contact." James nodded, then turned back to the stasis field. He pressed his palm fully against the energy barrier, which shimmered and rippled at his touch, but did not repel him as it would have a normal human. The crystalline patterns on his skin flared with intense light, forming a direct connection that bridged the barrier and extended toward Captain Lin's suspended form. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a circuit suddenly completing, the fragmented patterns on Captain Lin's skin began to respond, pulsing weakly at first, then with increasing strength as James's integrated network provided the missing protocols. Her frozen patterns began to shift and flow, mimicking the more advanced configurations visible on James's transformed body. Dr. Weiss watched in astonishment, years of scientific restraint, battling with the wonder of witnessing something beyond the boundaries of known science. The monitoring equipment surrounding the stasis chamber responded dramatically, screens filling with data as sensors detected the unprecedented interaction. "It's working," James said, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining the connection. "Her integration is resuming, accepting the corrected protocols. The stasis field is beginning to destabilize." As if in response to his words, the shimmering energy surrounding Captain Lin flickered, its steady hum becoming erratic. The crystalline patterns on her skin brightened, spreading to cover more of her visible body surface in flowing geometric designs, similar to James's, but with subtle variations unique to her own genetic structure. Then, with a sudden surge of energy that momentarily overloaded the laboratory's systems, the stasis field collapsed entirely. Captain Lin's suspended body began to fall, but before Dr. Weiss could move to catch her, the crystalline network on her skin flared with protective energy, slowing her descent until she settled gently onto the floor of the chamber. For several heartbeats, she lay motionless, Then her chest rose with a deep, shuddering breath, her first in 9 years. Her eyes opened, revealing the same crystalline luminescence that marked James's transformed state. She blinked slowly, adjusting to consciousness after years of stasis, then focused on James with immediate recognition, despite never having met him before. "You're like me," she said, her voice rough from disuse, but carrying the same dual resonance that characterized James's speech when the alien consciousness was active within him. Integrated. Complete. "Yes," James confirmed, offering his hand, to help her stand. "Though my integration is more recent than yours." Captain Lin took his hand, the crystalline patterns on their skin recognizing each other, creating a brief network of light where they touched. She rose to her feet with surprising steadiness for someone who had been in stasis for nearly a decade. "Sophia," Dr. Weiss said cautiously, maintaining his distance, "do you know who I am? Do you remember what happened to you?" She turned to him, her crystalline enhanced gaze penetrating in its intensity. "Dr. Alexander Weiss, Project Luminous. Consultant, you've been studying me since the Siberian incident." There was no accusation in her tone, merely a statement of fact. "I remember everything, the mission, the Soviet facility, touching the altered crystal, and I remember the stasis, though not as unconsciousness. It was more like being frozen in a moment of transformation, aware but unable to progress or communicate. The Soviet alterations corrupted the integration protocols," James explained. "Your body initiated stasis to prevent system failure, but couldn't complete the process without the missing code segments." She nodded, absorbing this information with remarkable composure. "And now?" "Now you're complete," James said simply. "Like me." Captain Lin looked down at her hands, where the crystalline patterns flowed with living light beneath her skin. "I can feel it, the connection to something ancient, something far beyond human understanding. Knowledge that isn't mine, but is now accessible." She looked up at James with newfound purpose. "And I know why you freed me. The Devourer, the defense network, we're nodes in a system designed to protect this world." Before James could respond, the facility's alarm system changed tone, from the general alert that had been sounding since their escape to a more urgent, penetrating signal that indicated a security breach in progress in their immediate vicinity. "The containment team has overridden my disruption," James said, turning toward the heavy security door. "They'll be here in less than a minute." Captain Lin's crystalline patterns flared in response to the threat, her military training instantly asserting itself despite 9 years of stasis. "We need to move," she said, her voice carrying the dual resonance of human and alien consciousness. "This facility has contingency measures for containing subjects like us, specialized weapons designed to disrupt the crystalline integration." Dr. Weiss moved quickly to a control panel near the far wall. "There's another exit, an emergency evacuation route designed for removing sensitive materials if the facility is compromised, but it requires director-level authorization." "Not anymore," James replied, moving to join him at the panel. He placed his hand against the electronic interface, the crystalline patterns on his skin interfacing directly with the system. Complex security protocols appeared on the screen, only to be bypassed in rapid succession, as James's transformed biology provided capabilities far beyond normal hacking techniques. A previously hidden door in the chamber wall slid open, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in red emergency lighting. "This leads to a secure garage with specialized transport vehicles," Dr. Weiss explained, ushering them toward the opening. "If we can reach it before the containment team locks down that section, we might have a chance." As they moved toward the escape route, James paused, his attention drawn to another secured door adjacent to the stasis chamber. The crystal vault, he said, the alien consciousness providing certainty. "We can't leave the samples behind." Dr. Weiss shook his head emphatically. "There's no time. The containment team will be here any second." "We need those crystals," Captain Lin stated, moving to stand beside James. "If we're going to build a defense network, we'll need integration nodes. Those samples are essential." Before Dr. Weiss could object further, James placed his hand against the vault's security panel. Unlike the previous systems he had interfaced, with this one triggered an immediate countermeasure, a surge of focused electromagnetic energy designed specifically to disrupt crystalline integration patterns. James recoiled with a sharp gasp of pain, the patterns on his skin flickering momentarily before stabilizing. "They've adapted the security protocols," he said grimly. "They're using what they've learned from studying Captain Lin to create defenses against us." Captain Lin stepped forward, her expression determined. "Try together. Combined integration patterns might overcome the countermeasures." They placed their hands on the security panel simultaneously, their crystalline networks synchronizing and reinforcing each other. The countermeasure activated again, but this time their combined energy field absorbed and redirected the surge, using its own power to accelerate their intrusion into the system. The vault door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a climate-controlled chamber filled with specialized containment units. Inside each transparent case, crystalline formations similar to those James had encountered in Afghanistan pulsed with subtle, dormant energy. Not the vibrant living light of active integration, but the potential for it waiting to be awakened. "We can't carry all of them," Dr. Weiss warned, glancing anxiously at the main entrance where the sounds of the approaching containment team were now audible. The heavy tread of tactical boots, the metallic slide of weapons being readied. "Captain." Lin moved decisively, military efficiency guiding her actions. She retrieved a specialized transport case from a wall-mounted rack and opened it on a nearby examination table. "The primary samples only," she instructed, selecting specific crystals with careful precision based on knowledge provided by her integrated consciousness. "These 7 contain the complete integration protocols." James joined her, adding 2 more samples to the case. "These are variants, adapted for different genetic profiles. We'll need the diversity for creating a functional network." As they secured the case, the main security door to the chamber began to shudder under external force, the containment team attempting to override the locks that James had engaged during their entry. The heavy metal barrier, designed to withstand significant force, nonetheless began to show signs of stress as specialized breaching equipment was applied from the other side. "They're using thermite charges," Dr. Weiss observed, recognizing the particular sound and smell of the breaching method. "We have less than 30 seconds before they're through." James secured the transport case and handed it to Captain Lin, then turned to face the weakening door. The crystalline patterns across his skin shifted into new configurations, concentrating energy in his palms and along his forearms. "Get to the evacuation corridor," he instructed, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his civilian status. Captain Lin recognized the tactical decision immediately, a rearguard action to buy time for their escape. "No heroics, Mercer," she cautioned, soldier to soldier. "Delay only, then follow." James nodded tightly as Captain Lin and Dr. Weiss retreated into the evacuation corridor. Once they were clear, he focused his concentration on the crystalline network that now integrated with his nervous system, accessing capabilities that his human consciousness was still learning to control. The security door buckled inward as the thermite charge completed its work, creating a gap through which the first member of the containment team immediately thrust a specialized weapon. Not a conventional firearm, but a device clearly designed for immobilizing enhanced subjects. James reacted with speed beyond normal. Human capability, the crystalline integration enhancing his neural processing and muscular response. He directed a focused pulse of energy from his transformed palms that struck the weapon before it could discharge, overloading its electronic components in a shower of sparks. The containment team member recoiled in pain, dropping the disabled device, but others quickly pushed forward through the widening breach. They were heavily armored in suits that appeared to contain specialized shielding, protection against the very capabilities James was demonstrating. Subject Mercer. A voice announced through a tactical communication system, "Stand down immediately. Lethal force is authorized if you resist." James had no intention of surrendering, but neither did he wish to harm the containment team, soldiers following orders, just as he once had. He directed his energy not at the personnel, but at the structural supports around the doorway, superheating the metal until it began to deform. With a groaning sound of stressed metal, the entire doorframe collapsed, temporarily blocking the entrance with debris and forcing the containment team to fall back. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it might provide the precious minutes needed for escape. James retreated quickly into the evacuation corridor, sealing the hidden entrance behind him. Captain Lin and Dr. Weiss were waiting several meters ahead, the former scanning the path forward with enhanced senses that could detect potential threats beyond normal human perception. "Clear to the junction," she reported as James joined them. "But I'm sensing electronic surveillance throughout the evacuation route. They're monitoring these corridors. They know about the evacuation routes." James asked Dr. Weiss, who nodded grimly. "Standard containment protocol. All potential exit paths will be covered," the doctor confirmed. "The specialized transport vehicles I mentioned are still our best option, but reaching them undetected will be nearly impossible." James considered their options, accessing the facility's layout through his integrated awareness of the electronic systems. "There's another approach," he said after a moment. "The maintenance shaft for the climate control system runs parallel to this corridor for the next 80 meters. It's too narrow for conventional access, but not for someone who can alter their cellular density," Captain Lin finished, understanding immediately. During her 9 years in stasis, her integrated consciousness had continued to process and develop, giving her a theoretical understanding of capabilities she hadn't yet had the opportunity to implement. "Show me how." James demonstrated the technique he had used earlier, manipulating the crystalline integration to alter his fundamental physical properties. Captain Lin observed carefully, then replicated the process with remarkable precision, her military background perhaps giving her an advantage in quickly mastering new tactical abilities. Dr. Weiss watched in astonishment as both transformed humans shifted into a semi-solid state, their outlines blurring slightly as their cellular structure reorganized into something beyond conventional biology. "The access panel is there," James indicated, pointing to a small maintenance hatch nearly invisible in the corridor wall. "It leads directly to the vehicle bay, bypassing the security checkpoints." "What about Dr. Weiss?" Captain Lin asked, gesturing to the physician who remained in his fully human state. "He can't follow us through the maintenance shaft." James turned to Dr. Weiss, the question implicit in his crystalline enhanced gaze. The doctor shook his head. "Firmly, I've gone as far as I can," he said, his scientific detachment reasserting itself after the chaos of their escape. "Someone needs to remain within the system, someone who understands what's really happening. I can do more good here, providing misinformation about your capabilities and intentions." Captain Lin nodded, respecting his decision. "They'll interrogate you extensively," she warned. "They may not believe you were coerced." "I have some experience with interrogations," Dr. Weiss replied with a thin smile, "and enough genuine shock at what I've witnessed today to make my reactions convincing. Go, find the others like you, the compatible hosts. Build your defense network before it's too late. James clasped the doctor's shoulder briefly, a gesture of respect and gratitude. We'll be monitoring the Project Luminous communications. If you need to contact us, use the phrase Crystal Protocol in any electronic communication. The integrated consciousness will recognize it and alert us. Dr. Weiss nodded, then stepped back. I'll create a diversion by triggering the fire suppression system in the East Wing. That should draw some of the security personnel away from the vehicle bay. Wait for the alarm, then move. Without further discussion, he turned and strode purposefully down the evacuation corridor in the opposite direction, his posture giving no hint of the extraordinary events he had just participated in. James and Captain Lin waited in tense silence, both monitoring the facility's electronic systems through their integrated awareness. When the fire alarm suddenly blared from the East Wing, sending emergency protocols cascading through the security network, they moved into action. James opened the maintenance access panel, and both shifted fully into their semi-solid state, flowing into the narrow channel that no conventional human could navigate. Their crystalline patterns provided illumination in the darkness as they moved with liquid grace through the climate control infrastructure, following the path that James's integrated awareness had mapped. They emerged in the vehicle bay through a ventilation grate, quickly resolidifying into their human forms. The large hangar-like space contained several specialized transport vehicles, unmarked black SUVs with reinforced structures and advanced technological components visible beneath their civilian disguise. Security is minimal, Captain Linney observed, scanning the area with enhanced senses. Dr. Weiss's diversion worked. 2 guards at the main entrance, but they're focused outward, expecting threats from outside rather than within. James moved to the nearest vehicle, placing his hand against the electronic locking system. The crystalline patterns interfaced seamlessly, with the technology bypassing security and engaging the engine without requiring physical keys. I'm detecting specialized containment equipment in the rear compartment, he noted, as Captain Lin secured the transport case containing the crystalline samples. Designed for transporting subjects like us, electromagnetic dampening fields, chemical suppressants. They've been preparing for this possibility for a long time, she replied grimly, disabling the containment systems with precise energy pulses from her transformed hands. 9 years studying me, probably decades studying the crystalline technology. Before that, the vehicle's engine hummed to life, its sound surprisingly quiet for the power it contained. James took the driver's position, while Captain Lin monitored the security systems through her integrated awareness. Main gate is sealed, she reported. Electronic barrier with physical reinforcement. They're implementing full facility lockdown. James smiled slightly, the crystalline patterns on his face shifting with the expression. They're thinking in terms of conventional escape. We have other options. He accelerated the vehicle not toward the main gate, but toward the far wall of the vehicle. Bay, an apparently solid concrete barrier separating the facility from the outside world. As they approached at increasing speed, Captain Lin showed no alarm, trusting her fellow integrated humans' assessment. Seconds before impact, James extended his awareness into the vehicle's systems, enhancing and redirecting its power through his crystalline interface. The SUV's structure reinforced with a field of energy that emanated from his transformed body, surrounding the vehicle in a protective cocoon. They hit the concrete barrier at over 60 miles per hour, but instead of a catastrophic collision, the wall seemed to lose cohesion at the point of impact, particles separating and flowing around the energized vehicle like water around a stone. They burst through into daylight, the concrete reforming. Behind them, as if reluctant to acknowledge the physics-defying breach. Molecular destabilization. Captain Lin observed with professional appreciation as they accelerated away from the facility, breaking the atomic bonds temporarily to allow passage. Impressive. Theoretically impossible by human scientific understanding, James added, monitoring the facility behind them through his integrated awareness of its electronic systems. They've triggered full containment protocols. Aerial support will be scrambled within minutes. Captain Lin nodded, military training immediately asserting itself. We need to separate from this vehicle as soon as possible. It will have multiple tracking systems, some of which may be shielded from our detection. James guided the SUV toward the forested area that surrounded the Harrington Institute, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to navigate the rough terrain at speeds that would have been dangerous for a conventional driver. His integrated consciousness provided constant updates on pursuit, security teams mobilizing, communications being established with external agencies, a helicopter being prepared for launch. There's a river approximately 2 kilometers ahead, he informed Captain Lin, processing geographical data provided by his enhanced awareness. Deep enough to conceal the vehicle if we sink it, with a current that will carry any traceable components away from our position. She nodded approval of the tactical decision, and after that, James considered the question, consulting both his human strategic thinking and the alien knowledge provided by the integration. We need to locate other compatible hosts, potential integration nodes for the defense network. Based on the genetic markers required, they'll be rare, perhaps 1 in every 100,000 humans. Do you have access to that kind of genetic database? Captain Lin asked, her military mind immediately focusing on practical implementation. Not directly, James admitted, but the integrated consciousness can sense compatible individuals within a certain radius. And there are echoes, impressions of others who have already achieved partial integration, similar to how I sensed your presence in the facility. Captain Lin processed this information with the efficiency of a trained tactical officer. So, we build the network, node by node, identifying compatible individuals and offering them integration if they choose to accept it. Yes, James confirmed, but we face opposition now. Project Luminous will devote significant resources to recapturing us, and they'll be monitoring for signs of crystalline integration around the world. They reached the river James had identified, a swift-flowing waterway partially concealed by overhanging vegetation. After removing the transport case containing the crystalline samples and anything else potentially useful, they guided the vehicle into the deepest part of the channel. James placed his hand against the dashboard one final time, sending a surge of energy through the electronic systems that would ensure complete failure of any remaining tracking devices. As the SUV sank beneath the surface, Captain Lin turned to him with the focused determination of a soldier presented with a clear mission. We need allies, resources, and secure locations to operate from. During my time in special operations, I established contingency infrastructure, safe houses, untraceable financial resources, communication networks outside official channels. James nodded, impressed but not surprised. Elite military operators often created such fallback positions as insurance against mission failure or agency betrayal. We should separate temporarily, he suggested, cover more ground while reducing the risk of simultaneous capture. We can maintain contact through the crystalline network. Once integrated, we can sense each other's presence and status across considerable distances. Captain Lin considered the strategy, then agreed. I'll head west, accessing my resources in the Rocky Mountain region. You should go east. The population density will provide better concealment and more potential compatible hosts. We'll need to establish a rendezvous protocol, James said, his military training complementing hers, and a method for securing the crystalline samples we're carrying. "Already considering it," she replied, opening the transport case to examine the 9 crystal specimens they had rescued from the vault. "These should be divided between us. Neither should carry more than could be safely protected." As they discussed tactical details, both became simultaneously alert to a new development: the distinctive sound of rotor blades approaching from the direction of the Harrington Institute. The pursuit had been mobilized more quickly than expected. "Aerial thermal imaging will make conventional concealment ineffective," Captain Lin noted, her voice calm despite the escalating threat. "We need to implement counter-signature techniques." James nodded, accessing knowledge from his integrated consciousness. "The crystalline network can redirect our thermal output, effectively cloaking us from infrared detection." They moved deeper into the forest cover, focusing their concentration on the crystalline patterns that covered significant portions of their bodies. In response to their directed intent, the patterns shifted configuration, creating a field effect that dispersed their body heat over a wider area rather than allowing it to concentrate in a human-shaped thermal signature. The helicopter passed overhead minutes later, its search pattern indicating the use of advanced detection technology. Yet it continued past their position without hesitation, the thermal masking having rendered them effectively invisible to its sensors. "They'll implement a ground search next," Captain Lin predicted, her expression thoughtful as she assessed their tactical situation. "Standard containment protocol for enhanced subjects," James agreed with her assessment. "We need to move quickly, create distance before they establish a perimeter." He focused briefly, accessing geographical data through his integrated awareness. "There's a small town approximately 12 kilometers northeast. From there, we can access transportation networks to separate as planned." They divided the crystalline samples between them, each securing 4 specimens in improvised carrying pouches created from materials they had taken from the SUV. The 9th crystal, larger and more distinctly structured than the others, they examined with special attention. "This one is different," James noted, the alien consciousness providing insights beyond his human understanding. "It's not just a vessel for integration protocols. It's a communication node designed to coordinate between integrated hosts across vast distances." Captain Lin studied it carefully, her enhanced perception detecting subtle energy patterns within its crystalline structure. "It should remain with you," she decided. "Your integration is more complete, more stable than mine. You'll make better use of its capabilities." James accepted the responsibility, securing the communication crystal separately from the others. As he did so, he felt its energy resonating with his own transformed biology, establishing connections that extended his awareness beyond his immediate surroundings. "I can sense other potential hosts," he said quietly, focusing on the new perceptions. "Distant, indistinct, but present. Individuals whose genetic structure would accept integration." "How many?" Captain Lin asked, the tactical implications immediately apparent to her military mind. "Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands worldwide," James replied, the alien knowledge flowing through his crystalline network. "Enough to create the defense system if we can reach them before the Devourer arrives." She nodded decisively. "Then we have our mission parameters. Locate compatible hosts, offer integration to those who choose it, establish the planetary defense network, all while evading Project Luminous and whatever other agencies they alert to our existence." "A challenge worthy of your operational experience, Captain," James observed with a slight smile. "And of your sniper's patience, Sergeant," she returned, recognizing the military precision that still influenced his thinking, despite his civilian status. They moved through the forest with enhanced speed and awareness, their transformed physiology allowing them to navigate the difficult terrain with ease that no conventional human could match. The crystalline integration had enhanced not just their cellular structure, but their sensory perception, giving them awareness of their environment that extended far beyond normal human limitations. As they traveled, James found himself adjusting to the dual nature of his new existence. Human consciousness working in parallel with the ancient alien presence that shared his mind. It wasn't an override or replacement of his identity, but rather an expansion, as if he had gained access to a vast library of knowledge and capabilities that complemented rather than conflicted with his core self. "Does it speak to you?" he asked Captain Lin as they paused at a ridgeline to survey the land ahead. The crystalline consciousness, does it communicate directly? She considered the question thoughtfully. Not in words, as we understand them. It's more like having access to another perspective that runs alongside my own thoughts. Sometimes it provides information I couldn't possibly know otherwise. Insights into physics or biology that go beyond human science. But it doesn't control me or dictate my actions. A true symbiosis, James observed, each contributing different strengths to create something greater than either could be alone. She nodded, her military pragmatism accepting this fundamental change with remarkable adaptability. It reminds me of specialized team operations, different skill sets combining toward a common objective. Except in this case, the team exists within a single integrated system. The analogy resonated with James's own experience, helping him contextualize the profound transformation he had undergone. As they continued their journey toward the distant town, he reflected on how completely his life had changed in less than 48 hours, from a high school history teacher troubled by a mysterious rash to a fugitive carrying alien technology within his transformed body, pursued by secret government agencies as he prepared to help defend Earth. In the months that followed, James and Captain Lin worked separately, but in perfect coordination through their crystalline connection. They located dozens of compatible hosts across the country, each carefully approached and offered the truth. Earth faced an existential threat, and they had been genetically selected to help defend it. Some refused, unwilling to undergo such a profound transformation. Others embraced their cosmic purpose, accepting integration and joining the growing network of crystalline nodes. Each new integration strengthened their collective awareness and capabilities. Project Luminous pursued them relentlessly. Several newly integrated hosts were captured and contained. Yet for each setback, the network adapted and expanded. 1 year after his initial transformation, James stood on a remote mountaintop, surrounded by 32 other integrated humans. Together, they activated the communication crystal, establishing contact with similar groups that had formed across the globe. For the first time, the full defensive network flickered to life, a web of crystalline consciousness spanning the planet. Through this network, they detected the Devourer's approach accelerating, drawn by the energy signatures of their activities. What they had believed was decades away now appeared to be mere years. The cosmic predator had sensed their awakening and was now moving directly toward Earth. Dr. Weiss, still working within Project Luminous, but now secretly allied with their cause, provided critical intelligence that allowed them to stay ahead of military containment efforts. His scientific insights helped refine their integration protocols, making the process safer and more efficient for new hosts. As James looked out over the valley below, his crystalline patterns pulsing in harmony with the others, he knew that the true battle was just beginning. Humanity remained largely unaware of both the danger approaching and the transformed humans working to save them. When the Devourer finally arrived, would their defensive network be strong enough to protect a world that now hunted them as anomalies? What would you do if you discovered your strange rash was actually the first sign of a transformation meant to save humanity? Would you run from it or embrace a destiny beyond anything you could have imagined? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to catch more incredible stories that blur the line between science fiction and reality. The truth is out there, sometimes hiding just beneath your skin. Arm, a cosmic threat.